I'm Belle Reid, and welcome back. So I'm currently in the Analog Electronic Music Studio at Stony Brook University in Long Island, New York. This studio is home to a very special part of electronic music history, which is the Series 200 electric music box built by Donald Buchla in the early 1970s. In this video, I'm going to talk about the history of the Buchla 200 system, highlighting some of its special characteristics by taking a look at this system's unique capabilities. I'm going to share a lot of information, patch demonstrations, and a whole ton of music along the way. Special thanks to the Buchla Archives for assisting with the research that went into preparing this video. It's going to be a big one. There's so much to say about this instrument and its historical significance, and I want to do it justice. So settle in and get ready to dive into the electric music box. The Series 200 electric music box was developed by Donald Buchla at the turn of the 1970s. By this time, Buchla was already a well-known figure in the world of academic and experimental electronic music. His previous generation of instruments, the Series 100 Modular electronic music system, had been in production since late 1965 and found its way into many notable studios and institutions in the late 1960s, including Mills College, the Columbia-Princeton Electronic Music Center, Harvard, and many others. If you want to learn more about the rich history behind the 100 system and its relationship to the San Francisco Tape Music Center, I'll leave a link in the description to a video I made using the prototype 100 system, currently housed at Mills College. In the late 1960s, after his instruments had become fairly well known, Buchla sold the rights to the 100 series designs to CBS Musical Instruments as a means of gaining greater financial support toward continued research and development. Buchla did briefly work with CBS to build instruments and even create new designs. However, it quickly became clear that there was a difference between CBS's commercial priorities and Buchla's vision for the future of his instruments. The marketplace for electronic musical instruments was still very new and very volatile. In the mid to late 1960s, there certainly was a market for studios and research institutions to build large installations of electronic music equipment. But as the decade drew to a close, there was a perceived opportunity to market more compact and affordable instruments to serve smaller institutions and individual musicians. CBS felt pressure to adapt to these opportunities, but Buchla's vision was more to refine his existing designs, give them more advanced capabilities, and even to integrate mini-computers into their design. In part because of these creative differences, Buchla quickly parted ways with CBS and immediately went to work on the next generation of his instrument, the Series 200 system. The 100 encapsulates an earlier, arguably more crude, sense of the potential uses for voltage control and modularity in instrument design. The 200 goes several steps further. It incorporated lessons learned through several years of using the 100 system. Buchla took feedback from friends, collaborators, clients, and his own personal musical practice to direct the 200's design, resulting in an instrument that was considerably more flexible, immediate, streamlined, and performable. In early brochures for the 200 system, Buchla and Associates summarized its strengths as follows: more functional density, extended dynamic range, self-contained monitoring and preview facilities, unrestrained expandability, new techniques for polyphonic signal generation, dynamic spectral and timbral modification, complex pattern generation, and control of spatial location and movement. Throughout this video, I'll touch on each of these key advancements and highlight the new musical possibilities that the instrument afforded. For institutions focused on cutting-edge and experimental music, the 200 held unique value and potential. And as such, it became the center of many institutions and studios in the early and mid-1970s. In 1971, composer Belle founded this studio. He previously had designed and installed the Electronic Music Laboratory at Yale University, where he also taught for a number of years. Upon joining the faculty at Stony Brook, he commissioned the creation of this Buchla 200 instrument, and it has been here ever since. Soon after, he was joined at Stony Brook by his former pupil and colleague, composer Daria Semigan. Like Arel, Semigan had done notable work on electronic music composition at Yale and at the Columbia-Princeton Electronic Music Center. She became the director of the Electronic Music Studio at Stony Brook and still teaches there to this very day. Both Arel and Semigan composed a lot of really wonderful music using this Buchla instrument. I will leave links in the description of this video in case you're curious to check it out. Buchla continued to refine the 200 system throughout the 1970s. As the decade went on, some of these earlier designs were replaced by more sophisticated or multifunctional updates. Many later modules were created specifically for use within computer-based systems, from the 500 series and the later 300 series. It's perhaps best to think of the Series 200 system as having numerous distinct eras of evolution. A Buchla 200 created in the latter half of the 1970s was quite different from a 200 made in 1971. Many of the modules that are commonly thought of as being integral to the 200, such as the 259 programmable complex waveform generator or the 296 programmable spectral processor, didn't emerge until several years into the 200's development. Though Buchla largely abandoned 200 series development toward the end of the decade, these instruments have become a common point of reference for modern instrument designers. The core concepts and unique features of the 200 can now be found in countless modern Eurorack modular synthesizers and other software and hardware-based instruments, many of which seek to recreate the experience of working with an original 200 system. So this instrument here presents a rare opportunity. Many original 200 systems have either been dismantled or significantly altered, but this instrument is in its original form and in its original home. So this makes it a really great resource for understanding what working with an original Buchla 200 would be like. All right, so for the rest of this video, we're going to focus on demonstrating some of the 200's unique capabilities and getting to know it better from a musical perspective. But first, let's start with a tour of everything that's inside this instrument. As I previously mentioned, there were many stages of development for the 200 system. This system represents the earliest available set of modules, with at least one of every module that was available at the point of the 200's introduction. It's safe to say that this is one of the most full-featured systems produced during this era. For now, we're just going to get a bird's eye view of what's in the system, and then later on, we're going to come back for more in-depth demos and explanations of features. This system has 5 Model 258 dual oscillators. Each 258 includes a sine to saw oscillator on the top and a sine to square oscillator on the bottom. Each has 3 identical audio outputs and a single audio input for frequency modulation. And the wave shape of each is continuously variable using this knob and CV input. So that's 10 oscillators in this system, which means there's potential for a huge amount of sound. This system contains 2 early 292 quad low-pass gates. The low-pass gate is a hallmark of the 200 series at large. It can perform filtering and/or VCA-like behavior. Famously, it imparts a very organic sense of articulation to the sound and is useful for mimicking some of the spectral qualities of acoustic instruments. Moving along, the 291 is a dual bandpass filter with 2 identical sections on top and bottom. Each section has a signal input, 2 identical signal outputs, and manual and voltage control of the filter's center frequency and bandwidth. There's also a control for the filter's quality factor or resonance and an audio input for FM of the filter's cutoff frequency. Next to the 291 is a Model 285 frequency shifter and balanced modulator. The top half is a frequency shifter with a signal input and both sum and difference outputs. The bottom half of the module is a balanced modulator that allows for continuously variable amplitude and ring modulation. This system includes two types of fixed filter banks. The Model 294 is a 4-band fixed filter bank. It has a single input and individual outputs for each band, and an integrated mixer with a sum output. And there are two of these in this system. The Model 295 is a very similar module, but it includes 10 filter bands instead of 4. The bottom of the module features parallel connections, which are passive multiples that allow you to route a single audio source to many destinations. The final type of audio processor in this system is the Model 275 dual EQ and reverberator. There are two of these in the system for a total of 4 channels of reverberation. Each channel includes a 2-band equalizer and a continuously variable reverberation control, which allows you to alter the reverb mix for each channel under voltage control. All right, so that covers this system's sound production and audio processing capabilities. So now let's talk about its mixing and sound distribution capabilities next. The system's primary output goes through the Model 226 quadraphonic monitor/interface module. This module is the primary means of connecting the 200 system to the rest of your studio. Typically, this would be interfaced directly with tape machines or other studio equipment. The system also features two 206 dual mixers. These are simple audio mixers that can be used to produce 2 3-channel mixes and or a single 6-channel mix. The Model 205 is a dual matrix mixer. Each matrix has 5 input channels and 4 output channels, with inputs represented as columns and outputs represented as rows. The 205 offers independent outputs from the left and right matrices, but it also offers combined output of both matrices for larger mixes. The Model 204 is a specialized mixer for dynamic quadraphonic panning. It allows you to direct sounds to up to 4 speakers and to use control voltages to control a sound's location in the quadraphonic space. It includes these 4 illuminated joysticks, which are typically used to manually position the sounds in the quad field. In terms of audio I/O, the system contains one other important module, which is the Model 270 quad preamp. This module offers 4 quarter-inch inputs, each with continuously variable gain control, allowing you to interface microphones or other instruments with the system. All right, that covers it for this system's audio-centric modules. So now let's turn to its control voltage sources. Conveniently located to the right of the quad preamp is the Model 230 triple envelope follower. This module accepts audio input and produces an output that is analogous to the input's instantaneous loudness, effectively allowing you to use the amplitude of an incoming signal as a control source for other aspects of the system. This system includes 8 envelope generators in the form of 2 quad modules, the Model 280 quad envelope generator and the Model 284 quad voltage controlled envelope generator. The Model 280 contains 4 relatively simple envelope generators, each with attack and decay controls. The Model 284 is very similar to the 280, with the addition of voltage control inputs and 2 additional envelope stages. It allows you to create somewhat more complex envelopes, and to create envelopes whose duration can be voltage controlled. Both the 280 and 284 can loop by patching their pulse outputs back into their own pulse inputs, effectively turning them into free-running LFO-like modulation sources. Notably, because the 284's time base can be voltage controlled, it can also be used as a voltage controllable clock source. Next, we have the Model 256 dual control voltage adder. This module contains 2 identical control voltage mixers. Each channel includes 4 inputs, each with a dedicated attenuverter and a single offset knob, which adds a variable positive voltage offset to the mix of the 4 inputs. Next, we have the Model 265, the early version of Buchla's famous source of uncertainty. This module is divided into 3 parts. The top section of the module provides 3 distinct noise outputs, each with slightly different spectral profile. The next section contains 2 continuously fluctuating random voltage sources, each with independently controllable rate of change. And the final section contains 2 stepped random voltage sources, whose outputs update to new random values upon receiving a trigger at their pulse inputs. The Model 264 is a specialized control voltage processor and distributor. It is a quad sample and hold and polyphonic adapter designed primarily to accommodate polyphonic signal distribution within the system. This is one of the most unusual and rare modules in the system, so I'm going to talk about it more specifically and show some demos later in this video. This system is unique in its inclusion of 3 sequencers, 2 Model 246 16-step sequencers, and a single Model 245 5-step sequencer. Aside from the number of steps, these sequencers are all identical in functionality. We'll discuss the sequencers more extensively in a little while. Lastly, one of my favorite parts of the system is the Model 217 multiple touch-controlled voltage source. This module is essentially 4 capacitive touch controllers in one, featuring 2 keyboard sections, a 4-key section here and a 17-key section here. And above the keyboard are 2 analog controllers, which are continuous voltage sources that are conceptually similar to ribbon controllers. We'll explore many ideas for how to use the 217 throughout the video. Before we start to look at some specific musical examples, I'd like to take a moment to talk about some general quality of life upgrades that, to me, make the 200 feel a lot more immediate than the prior 100 series system. These primarily have to do with the handling of control voltage inputs. If you've seen my overview of the Mills Buchla 100 system, you might recall that the 100's handling of control voltage is, by modern standards, a bit unusual. Most parameters aren't voltage controllable at all, and for the ones that are, you're required to choose between using external control voltage or the module's built-in parameter control knob. For example, on the 158 dual sine sawtooth generator, with the control switch set to internal, you can use the large front panel controls to define the oscillator's pitches. With the switch set to external, you gain the ability to use an external control voltage to, for instance, sequence the oscillator pitch or control the pitch with a touch plate keyboard. But when using external voltages, suddenly the large panel control knob has no effect. The same is true of the system's other oscillators, filters, and timing sources. On the 200, this is no longer the case. Instead of requiring you to choose between internal or external control, you always have the option of using the module's primary control knob in combination with voltage control. Compare the Model 258 dual oscillator to its 100 series counterpart, the 158, for instance. On the 258, the internal-external switch is gone altogether, and in its place are not 1, but 2 pitch CV inputs, each with their own processing knob, plus a large front panel pitch offset control. This makes the 258 feel much more convenient to use. It's easy to control a single 258 with multiple CV sources without needing to think about integrating a CV mixer or voltage processor. This specific type of workflow improvement is found throughout the 200. The 258 is the only module whose primary parameter offers 2 distinct CV inputs, but many other modules, at very least, offer processing knobs for scaling incoming control voltages. And in modules that don't include processing knobs, the panel controls and external CV are summed. For instance, on the 292 low-pass gate, each channel's level control and CV input are always active simultaneously. All right, so now that we've looked at the full system and discussed some of the general workflow updates, let's revisit that list of the 200's design goals, as stated in the early 200 brochure. We've already seen that the 200 is extremely functionally dense, and as we go, we'll naturally see that its radical embrace of voltage control contributes greatly to its potential for expandability. We'll present examples that I hope should demonstrate the instrument's dynamic range and fidelity. So, for the remainder of this video, I'd like to focus on the remaining points from this list. Namely, the 200's potential for dynamic spectral and timbral modification, its handling of polyphonic signal generation, its handling of spatial location and mixing, its capacity for complex pattern generation, and the ways its control structure offer opportunities for expressive interaction. Really quick, before we move forward, I want to take a sec to tell you about my online class, Learning Sound and Synthesis. Learning Sound and Synthesis is a super comprehensive and step-by-step program that teaches you everything you need to make music with modular synthesizers, to design your own sounds from scratch, and to turn your synth sounds and patches into complete compositions and performances. Whether you want to make ambient soundscapes, melodic generative music, synth pop, techno, noisy, chaotic sci-fi sounds, or anything in between. When you join Learning Sound and Synthesis, you'll also get access to an incredibly supportive community of people who, just like you, are super passionate about electronic music and modular synths. And you'll also be able to get personalized support and feedback on your music. I typically offer Learning Sound and Synthesis 1 to 2 times per year. You can learn more and join the waitlist for the next round by going to soundandsynthesis.com/waitlist. Learning synth and synthesis. So when Buchla said that the 200 offered dynamic spectral and timbral control, what did he mean? The 200 includes several facilities for continuously varying the timbre of its core sound generators, many of which can be voltage controlled. Let's start by looking at the 258. One of its key improvements over the earlier 158 dual sine sawtooth generator and the 144 dual square wave generator is its inclusion of continuously variable voltage controllable wave shape. Each of its oscillators allows the user to continuously blend between sine and saw or square shapes using the front panel control or CV inputs. In addition to the wave shape controls, each of the 258's oscillators offers a dedicated FM input. Unlike the later and now well-known 259, the 258 does not offer voltage control of the FM depth, but nonetheless, the FM input offers an excellent opportunity for generating a range of complex spectra. of course, varying the wave shape controls in conjunction with FM can yield really interesting results. So as you can hear, like the 100 series oscillators before it, the 258 offers incredible FM depth. As such, it's also a great candidate for oscillator cross-modulation, using two oscillators to modulate one another simultaneously. This is a quick way to find some especially complex, dynamic, and chaotic sounds. One of the other key sources of timbral control in the 200 is the 292 quad low-pass gate, one of the modules that contributes most significantly to the 200's classic sound. Low-pass gates are a unique Buchla invention first introduced with the early 200 series. They allow for several modes of operation, each of which impacts the sound slightly differently. The 292 is composed of 4 identical low-pass gate circuits. Each channel offers a level control, level CV input, and a mode switch. In amplitude or gate mode, each channel acts like a typical VCA. In low-pass or frequency mode, it acts as a low-pass filter. And in combo mode, each channel acts as a so-called low-pass gate, essentially combining together filter and VCA-like characteristics. So as you can probably hear, especially in combo mode, the gates have a somewhat sluggish response. This is in part due to their reliance on a special type of opto-isolator, commonly referred to as a Vactrol. The nature of these components' role in the circuit is such that even short envelopes sent to the CV input will produce a very organic, subtle decay, which is sometimes described as a ringing sound. So you can hear that ringing despite the fact that I have my envelope set here as short as it can possibly go. The response of this module is considered to be favorable for a couple of reasons. One is that it mimics some of the behaviors of acoustic-sounding bodies. Imagine striking the bar of a marimba, for instance. If you strike it softly, the sound will be relatively quiet and relatively dark. That is to say, it will have a relatively simple spectrum with little high-frequency energy. The harder you strike the bar, the louder the sound will be, and the more high-frequency content will be present in the sound. By coupling filtering and amplification characteristics in this circuit, Buchla makes it possible to achieve uncannily organic-sounding tones. Low-pass gates can also be used to simulate a sense of sound receding in space. That is, sounds that are farther away from us tend to carry less high-frequency information, but as they approach, more of their high-frequency information becomes apparent. The low-pass gate can be an effective way of articulating spatial dynamics in a system. So gates and oscillators are the typical core components of a voice in the Buchla signal path, but there are other modules which can be used for special timbral alterations as well. One is the 291 dual bandpass filter, which was a considerable refinement of its predecessor, the Model 191 sharp cutoff filter. The 291 contains two identical variable width bandpass filters. It's a very characterful filter and can significantly alter incoming sounds both manually and under voltage control. Another interesting feature of the 291 is that it also has an FM input, allowing you to use sound sources within the system to modulate the center frequency at audio rates. This is a pretty subtle technique, and it's most effective when the modulator is in low audio frequency range. Another module that provides opportunities for dynamic timbral modification is the 285 frequency shifter and balanced modulator. The internal reference oscillator's frequency can even be voltage controlled, allowing for programmed dynamic changes to the modulation characteristics. Ring modulation and frequency shifting are technically very similar processes, each of which offers a way of continuously varying an incoming sound spectral content. The idea being that you can use each to produce sum and difference frequencies of a reference signal, in this case a sine wave oscillator, and any desired external signal. This can lead to peculiar effects like spectral compression and even spectral inversion, but it's probably easiest to understand what all of this means by hearing it.
February 9th, 1971. Scorpio, rising, sun and moon in perfect opposition, Earth interposed.
The gambits accepted declined foretell the choices to be offered. You may live through a variety of illusions, passions, fantasies, in such a way as to have an exciting, entertaining, albeit often difficult and painful life.
Rather, you will be clear about everything, and you will have no delusions, and will probably be utterly bored. Death will perfect your state events and objects in sound space, sets of properties, graduations.
One of the interesting characteristics of the balanced modulator is that it offers a continuously variable response control, which allows you to seamlessly access unaffected sounds, amplitude modulated sounds, or ring modulated sounds by using this knob or by applying control voltage. The final modules in this system that can perform significant timbral alterations to sounds are the filter banks. The catch is that the filter banks themselves don't offer control voltage inputs for any aspects of their behavior. That feature wasn't implemented until later with the 296 programmable spectral processor, first designed in 1977. That said, the integrated mixing functionality does make it easy to make significant spectral alterations to incoming sounds. And with some clever patching, you can dynamically control the individual band's levels by running them through low-pass gates. So as you can see, there's a ton of flexibility in the 200's audio path, and many ways to apply dynamic changes to the sound's spectral content. You can filter things, you can gate things, you can vary the oscillator's wave shape, and you can even use specialized tools to carve away specific parts of a sound spectrum, or to significantly alter or scramble a sound's spectral content. Though many of the modules we've looked at have fairly clear precedents in the form of earlier Buchla 100 modules, the 200 offers considerably more opportunities for time-varying control and timbral articulation. One of the original stated strengths of the 200 system was its capacity for polyphonic signal generation. In the early 1970s, essentially all commercially available synthesizers were monophonic. Now, polyphony is a complex topic. Obviously, any electronic instrument with multiple sound sources in it has the capacity to produce some kind of polyphonic texture. So what I mean when I say that most of the electronic instruments of this era were monophonic is that the implementation of most control sources promoted the connection to a single sound source and a single articulative structure. For example, in the Buchla 100, the Model 112 keyboard offered a pulse output and CV outputs for 2 rows of tuned control voltages. Typically, the pulse output would be connected to the pulse input on an envelope generator, while the CV output was connected to the pitch input of an oscillator. The oscillator's audio would run through a gate whose level was controlled by the envelope generator. We could run the second row of CV output to a different oscillator, but because there's only one pulse output, and because the behavior of the CV outputs is coupled, we can't have true independence between the two different oscillators. They'll always change pitch at the same time, and they'll always be articulated at the same time. The 100 did offer some brute force solutions to the problem of polyphony, but they required a significant number of oscillators, gates, and a specialized keyboard controller. As such, this also wasn't a truly satisfying solution to the problem of polyphony. One potential solution was a system that could capture information from a monophonic control source and distribute it to multiple different destinations, which was exactly the purpose of the 264. The Model 264 Quad Sample and Hold and Polyphonic Adapter is a multi-purpose module designed specifically to tackle the problem of polyphony. At its core, the 264 is 4 sample and holds and a pulse counter. So ignoring the bottom half of the module, the structure of the upper half should be fairly clear. It's 4 identical sample and hold or track and hold circuits, which each have a CV input, a pulse input, a CV output, and a switch for selecting between track and hold or sample and hold behavior. These can be used like any standard sample and hold. The 264's polyphonic capabilities are handled in the lower section of the module, the polyphonic adapter. We can think of the polyphonic adapter as basically being a specialized pulse counter. You send a pulse into its input and select a number of voices from 1 to 4. As pulses are received at the input, each pulse output will go high sequentially. The polyphonic trick is achieved by using a common control voltage input for all of the sample and holds, instead of using their individual control voltage inputs. If we use the polyphonic adapter's pulse outputs to trigger the individual sample and holds, we suddenly have the ability to perform polyphonic data distribution. Typically, you would connect the CV and gate outputs from a keyboard to the polyphonic inputs. You'd connect the control voltage outputs to the pitch inputs of 4 oscillators, and you would send the pulse outputs both to the pulse inputs and to the 4 envelope generators to manage the loudness of the 4 oscillators. So there are a couple of things I was doing as I was demoing that I haven't explained, so I just want to mention them here because they're pretty interesting. The first is that this module has an offset knob. By moving this knob up or down, you're able to apply an offset to all of the control voltage outputs. And then there's also this modulation control here and input, which allows you to use an audio signal to frequency modulate all of the destinations. And then with this knob here, you can control the amount of modulation. So while a keyboard is an obvious input structure to use with this type of voice allocation system, it's not the only option. For instance, we could use a sequencer as a control source. So just for fun, let's try setting up a different wave shape and slightly different envelope settings for each of our voices. Or we could use a random voltage as the data source instead. So here in this patch, I am using fluctuating random voltages from the 265 to control the contour of the resulting string of notes. The Model 264 uses a clever combination of simple tricks in order to implement a basic form of polyphony. Though it's certainly more crude than the microprocessor approaches that would emerge later in the 1970s, it was one of the earliest, if not the earliest, example of a polyphonic control distribution scheme in a commercially available electronic instrument, predated only by experimental instruments such as Harold Bode's Warbow formant organ. An adapted form of this concept was integrated into several Buchla keyboard controllers as early as 1971, including the Model 237, 238, and 219. In addition to being a flexible instrument, the 200 system was meant to be able to act as the central hub of an electronic music studio. It could act as an entire studio's central mixing facility. It could directly interface with tape machines and external signal processors. It could process signals from microphones and external instruments. And unlike many studio mixers of the time, it included many voltage-controlled features. In the context of a studio, this could mean the implementation of automated mix control, mixing scene recall, and even more unusual possibilities. And in keeping with the times, it offered several integrated solutions for quadraphonic mixing and sound distribution. Though today, most music is encoded into two-channel or stereo audio, in early electronic music, it wasn't uncommon to experiment with higher channel counts. This allowed for a finer degree of control over where you wanted to position sounds in space. There were many different multi-channel audio formats, but most resisted standardization. By the late 1960s, though, quadraphonic sound had begun to emerge as a relatively common format for both experimental electronic music and more adventurous popular music acts. Famously, 4-channel sound diffusion played a significant role in psychedelic rock groups' live performances, and experimental quadraphonic radio broadcasts were already underway by the late 1960s. In fact, some of the earliest quadraphonic radio broadcast experiments were carried out by Buchla himself, in association with Bay Area station KPFA and KSAN. Very quickly, large record companies established standards for quadraphonic audio encoding on vinyl discs. And for a brief time in the 1970s, quadraphonic sound systems and quadraphonic records were actually fairly common. The Buchla 200 system was one of the only and certainly one of the earliest musical instruments designed specifically for use in quadraphonic medium. This particular system contains a full complement of quadraphonic mixing and panning facilities. As mentioned before, the Model 226 acts as a central studio I/O and quadraphonic monitoring tool. It can be used in conjunction with external quadraphonic sound sources like 4-channel tape machines, and also allows for quadraphonic mixing from sources within the system. The Model 205 matrix mixer also has applications in the context of quadraphonic sound distribution. For instance, you could connect the A, B, C, and D outputs from the 205 to one of the system inputs on the 226. Then you could define a simple quadraphonic mix of several incoming channels by adjusting the amount of sound that you want to be present at each output channel. So obviously I'm recording and presenting this video in a stereo format. So what I'm doing in order to simulate a sense of space is I'm taking 2 outputs from the matrix mixer and running them directly to the left and right outputs. Then I'm taking outputs C and D, which in a quadraphonic setup would be the rear speakers, and I'm running those into a reverb. So it's obviously not the same as being in a quadraphonic space, but it will still be able to give you a little bit of sense of depth and simulate a space. This instrument also includes a Model 204 quadraphonic panner. The 204 has 4 signal inputs and a level control for each channel. The module has 4 pairs of outputs, which offer a quadraphonic mix of all of the inputs. Each channel has 2 CV inputs for X and Y location, respectively. The module also features 4 joysticks, each of which offers X and Y CV outputs. It's typical to bridge the control voltage outputs from the joysticks to the control voltage inputs for each panner using shorting bars, as we can see here. This allows you to use the joysticks to determine the position within the quadraphonic space. However, there's no inherent coupling between the joysticks and the location controls. So you could use other control voltage sources to automate the panning, and likewise, you could use the joysticks as control voltage sources for any aspect of the system's behavior, which is super, super fun. One of the other really interesting parts of this system in the context of mixing and spatialization is the Model 275 dual equalizer and reverberator. So this module is connected to several large spring tanks in the back of the instrument in order to provide artificial reverberation. One of the interesting things about the 275 in particular is that it offers continuously variable and even modulatable control of the reverb, allowing you to create a sensation of sounds receding into and emerging from distant spaces. You might have noticed that many of the system's mixing, processing, and spatialization modules have these yellow monitor switches. These enable connections to a system monitor bus. This could have been used for a variety of reasons, including the creation of alternate mixes or preview signals. Or it could be used for purposes related to effect processing or extended multi-channel signal distribution. So I see two primary aspects of the 200's mixing facilities as being particularly interesting and even revolutionary. One is that it offers the opportunity of creating a studio console that extensively uses control voltage for level management, signal routing, and effects processing. The other is that the 200 placed emphasis on spatial location as a significant performable parameter. While multi-channel music had been around for a while by the time the 200 was introduced, this was one of the first intentional electronic instruments to focus on the idea of multi-channel sound distribution as a primary performable technique. So I think this is super interesting because it makes sound distribution become a control that is just as immediate and performable and nuanced as other musical parameters within the system, like controlling the pitch or the timbre or the loudness of sound. And this possibility became central to the work of composers like Morton Subotnick and Suzanne Ciani. Another one of the stated strengths of the 200 system was its ability to generate complex patterns. This capability is facilitated primarily by its sequencers, which presented significant advancements from their 100 series counterparts. Sequencers in the 100 series, though a significant breakthrough at the time of their introduction, were, by modern standards, fairly simplistic in their design. They could only progress in one direction, they always started at step 1, and they always progressed through their steps entirely in order. This was a huge upgrade from earlier electronic music production workflows, which would have required a significant amount of hand splicing and magnetic tape to achieve similar results. But by the time the 200 series was introduced, Buchla's ideas around what sequencers could be used for had considerably advanced. So, to better understand this, let's take a closer look at the 246. The 246 is a 16-step sequencer with 4 rows of tunable control voltage outputs: A, B, C, and D. The 246 also contains a pulsar, which can be thought of as a voltage-controllable clock source. There's no intrinsic linkage between the pulsar and the sequencer. However, it's typical to use a shorting bar, as you can see here, to bridge together the pulsar's pulse output and the sequencer's advance input. The pulsar includes control voltage inputs for the pulse duty cycle, as well as the pulse frequency, allowing you to voltage control its speed. It also features dedicated push switches and pulse inputs to start and stop the pulsar at will. In the 100 series, the timing pulse generator and sequencer were completely separate modules, and systems that contained multiple sequencers might still only contain a single timing pulse generator. But in the 200 series, the pulsar is always part of the sequencer. Now, of course, the simplest way to use the sequencer is simply to connect the pulse to the sequencer's advance input. And of course, you can also use multiple rows from the sequencer to modulate multiple parameters of sound. Using the switches in the stage select section of the panel here, you can create shorter sequences, effectively forcing the sequence to reset once it reaches a stage with an active switch. So each sequencer stage has 2 pulse outputs, which can be used to initiate events elsewhere in the system. This could include triggering new random voltages, envelopes, or even starting and stopping other sequences. So here in this example, the sequencers are all triggering one another. And that's what's creating this kind of evolving pattern that you'll hear. Each stage of the sequencer also has a dedicated stage select pulse input. When a pulse is received at any of these inputs, the sequencer automatically jumps to that stage. This feature could be used in many different ways. For instance, you could conceptualize the individual stages of a sequencer as being a kind of rudimentary form of parameter memory. You could then use specific pulse sources in order to select the currently active preset, for instance. So here in this patch, I'm using several outputs from the keyboard in order to select specific stages of the sequencer. The result is that each key I press on the keyboard has a different sound character associated with it. The stage select inputs could also be used to create several nested subsequences. So the stage select inputs are interesting in their own right, but one of the most interesting features of this module for me is this analog input. The analog input effectively allows you to scan the sequencer using any control voltage. So this allows you to create more nonlinear sequences. So for example, here I am using an envelope to scan the sequencer, and you can see that it can go forward and backwards through the sequence. And then as I adjust the envelope parameters, we're going to be able to get more interesting patterns. And now I'll use a random voltage to address the sequencer instead. The ability to address the sequencer using control voltages represents a significant conceptual shift in the potential purposes for a sequencer. It transforms it from a device that executes a series of tasks in order to a device that can perform more nonlinear voltage processing tasks. For example, the sequencer could be used as a crude type of quantizer, or it could be used as a complex comparator, or it can be thought of like a low-resolution lookup table, introducing a layer of nonlinearity between its input and output. The 246's expanded functionality presages later Buchla devices, like the deeply multifunctional multiple arbitrary function generator, as well as the conceptual structures used to define voltage functions and sequences in Buchla's computer-based instruments. An important aspect of the 200 and all of Buchla's instruments was the capacity for expressive multidimensional control. It was really important to Buchla that his instruments be playable. He strove to achieve this by creating performance interfaces that, over the course of many generations of development, grew increasingly complex in their technical capabilities. They often focused on extracting multiple meaningful streams of data from relatively simple and intuitive actions. To that effect, one of the most obvious trends in Buchla's work is the continued development and refinement of his touch-sensitive keyboards, which were a feature of most of his instruments through the end of his life. This system contains the 217, which at the time of its introduction was Buchla's most sophisticated performance interface. As I mentioned previously, the 217 is essentially 4 performance controllers in a single module, so let's take a look at them one by one. On the left-hand side of the module, there is a 4-key section, independent from the remainder of the module. This section includes individual pressure and pulse outputs for each key, allowing you to use them as 4 fully independent control sources. This section also has group outputs for pressure, pulses, and a tunable control voltage set using these 4 knobs. Additionally, it features a fixed voltage output in which each key is assigned a specific static voltage level. So this section can be used as a keyboard all on its own right. The 17-key section here is very similar to the 4-key section, the primary difference being that there are no individual pressure outputs for each key. There are, however, still individual pulse outputs for each key, as well as group pulse outputs, pressure outputs, tunable variable voltage, and a fixed voltage output. Of course, you can combine these sections together in a variety of ways, which expands the keyboard's expressive potential. And finally, the 217 includes 2 analog controllers, each of which have independent pulse, pressure, and location control voltage outputs. Of course, in combination with the other control voltage sources, more dynamic and nonlinear relationships between interaction and response can be constructed. Another way that Buchla's instruments commonly permit expressive control is through the use of envelope followers. As I've mentioned earlier, an envelope follower is a tool that's designed to extract control voltage from external audio signals by tracking their loudness. So the louder the incoming audio signal is, the higher the voltage will be coming out of the envelope follower. Buchla's first envelope followers were part of the 100 series, developed in part to assist composer Morton Subotnick in developing a more embodied relationship with his own Buchla system. Subotnick famously sought to imbue his instruments with the same level of expressive command that he had over his voice. Buchla's envelope follower was one persistent solution to that need, and it fits with Buchla's ongoing mission to develop efficient and intuitive means of translating musicians' intention into effective electronic control. The 230 is 3 identical envelope followers in a single module, each of which provide continuously variable sensitivity and decay time, as well as dedicated envelope and timing pulse outputs. The timing pulse outputs were not part of the older 130 envelope design. And for me, adding this feature in is a huge development. It makes it much easier to tightly synchronize external microphone input with resulting gestures on the 200. Using envelope followers in this way is really important to my personal performance practice because it makes it so much easier to develop a really responsive and conversational relationship with the instrument that I'm working with. It's essentially a way of giving the system the ability to hear the world around it, or even to hear its own output and to form responses to those auditory stimuli. So let's take a look at some examples. Of course, turning knobs and pushing switches are an integral part of programming and performing on an instrument like this. However, the complexity of the instrument's control voltage resources and the multidimensional nature of its points of external interaction make it quite easy to build meaningful and nuanced relationships between what you give the system and what it gives back to you. Now, what I've shown in this video so far is really only scratching the surface of this instrument's expressive capabilities. We've hardly touched on features of the source of uncertainty or the envelope generators, for instance. But what's more interesting to me than the specific features of the instrument is how it feels to interact with it as a whole. In many ways, working with this instrument can feel like a collaborative partnership in which the instrument can make decisions that only partly require your input or control, and they can often surprise you. Interacting with the system and listening to it in this way, you can start to understand that all of its various points of interaction, its touch plates, its envelope followers, its control voltage inputs, all of its knobs and switches, they aren't just ways to specify how you want it to behave. They're ways in which the instrument can sense specific aspects of the world around it, and attempt to contextualize their significance. Okay, so we have been on quite a journey. We've taken a tour of this instrument and discussed a lot of its technical capabilities. We've also established some historical context, and I hope that through this, I've been able to demonstrate to you why the 200 in its time was such a bold and innovative and unique instrument. I hope that the musical examples I've shared so far have given you a little sense of what this instrument is capable of. But again, it's important to know that with everything I've shared here so far, I've still only scratched the surface of what this instrument is capable of. While I've focused a lot in this video on the various ways that the 200 develops on some of the ideas from the older 100 system, I think it's important to acknowledge that the 200, as great as it was still a relatively early step in Don Buchla's journey as an instrument designer. His later instruments, including the 500, 300, Touche, the 400, 700, and others, all incrementally iterated on and developed the concepts that we've seen demonstrated today. Each of these presented a new take on similar musical concepts, and each became more sophisticated and more unusual as they developed. I think it would be wrong to say that the 200 is the greatest of all of Buchla's achievements as an instrument designer, but no doubt it is deeply inspiring and a very powerful and beautiful instrument. So before wrapping up, I want to take a moment to discuss a little bit of extra context around the 200's creation, and more specifically around its name. In all of the literature about the 200 system, it is referred to as an electric music box, and not a synthesizer. This is a term that Buchla would apply to several of his instruments going forward. But what is an electric music box? The name came about partly because Buchla wanted to intentionally avoid the use of the term synthesizer, due to its perceived negative associations with the term synthetic. Despite the fact that the term synthesis simply implies a confluence of many independent processes that are used to produce a unified result, at this point in time, the word synthetic had come into popular use in reference to the newly popular synthetic fabrics, like rayon. So these synthetic fabrics, designed to be a lower-cost alternative to natural fibers, were often seen as cheaper, lower-quality imitations to the real thing. And along similar lines, one emergent sentiment about synthesizers is that they sought to synthesize the sounds of real, that is to say, acoustic instruments. But Buchla's goal wasn't to create an artificial piano, for example. It was to create an entirely new instrument altogether. So at the time, several instrument designers sought to distance themselves from this term, synthesizer. They didn't see the music that was produced by their instruments as being synthetic or lesser than, and they didn't want to suggest that their intention was to imitate other kinds of instruments. There's more to unpack in the name electric music box, however. We can think of the electric music box in relation to a traditional music box. The complexity of its control voltage generation is such that it can produce music autonomously on demand. A poem written by artist and composer Charles McDermott and Don Buchla at this time relates the instrument's behavior to several complex dynamic processes, such as the chain of events that occurs when you drop a ping pong ball on a marble floor. The context of this poem, which extensively references ideas such as nonlinear dynamics and biofeedback, suggests that the name electric music box should also be viewed through the lens of cybernetics. In the fields of systems theory and cybernetics, the concept of a black box refers to a complex and sometimes unknown or unknowable process that accepts some form of input, which it then translates in order to produce an output. The black box usually contains a highly nonlinear process in which the relationship between input and the output can be difficult to predict or to fully understand. And for Buchla, the 200 series was a black box split open, allowing the user to define the nature of the nonlinearity that would process their input. So the instrument's ability to provide significant and immediate visual and auditory feedback to the user makes it relatively easy for the user to come to understand themselves as part of a sort of regulatory feedback loop with the instrument. The user provides an input to the system, and then the system provides a response. In return, the user may choose to alter their own behavior or to modify the behavior of the system. So there's more to unpack about the influence of cybernetics on Buchla's work. But even this one connection can really help us understand the nature of this device and its aesthetic intentions. So as the McDermott-Buchla poem concludes, experimental trial and error, work and rework, mold and remold, conceive and refine, concretize and audition. Listen to the results of the idea in real time. Corrective feedback in one biochemical response cycle. Online realization of ideation. How does it feel? Make fine adjustment to get the event object into exactly the right shape. Created, conserved, and released. The electric music box plays on and on.
Hey, it's me again. I just finished editing this video and I wanted to express an additional huge thank you to Ryan Gaston and the Buchla Archives for helping to put this video together, as well as to Daria Semigan and everyone at Stony Brook University for welcoming us in to document such a very special instrument and such a special part of electronic music history. So as I'm sure you can guess, putting together a project like this is a huge amount of work. It's an enormous effort, it takes a lot of time, and at the moment, these projects are 100% self-funded. It's my hope and intention to continue to bring more educational videos and more historical videos about rare or undocumented instruments to my YouTube channel. So if you got something from this video, if you learned something from it, if you enjoyed it, I would love to ask you for your support in helping bring more projects like this to life. There's a couple different ways that you can support future projects. First, if you're interested in learning synthesis yourself, you can join my synthesis class called Learning Sound and Synthesis. It is a super comprehensive step-by-step program that will teach you everything you need to know in order to become fluent in sound design and sound synthesis, to make your own music with synths, to compose, perform, and improvise live with synthesizers. I typically open enrollment to that class 2 times a year, and there are links in the description below this video for more information, and you can join the waitlist and check it all out. The second way that you can support is by joining my Patreon community at any tier. My Patreon community is a huge help in covering things like research time, travel support, production costs for videos like this, so it really means a lot to me. And finally, if you want to support but you're not able to do so financially, I would love to ask you to simply share this video with a friend, like, subscribe, stick around for future videos. Your presence here in this community means so much to me. All right, that's it for now. As always, thank you so much for watching and for listening, and I'll see you next time.